One Republican presidential candidate who's getting in some foreign travel over the weekend is former Vice President Mike Pence. We spoke with him yesterday from a stop on his way back from Ukraine. We started with the Colorado website designer's Supreme Court victory. What do you say to Americans who believe that this opens the door to discrimination?
From the moment the Supreme Court recognized a same-sex marriage, the court had made a commitment that they would still respect the freedom of religion and the freedom of conscience of every American. And in Lori Smith's case, she made it very clear that she would take all customers in her website design. She just simply said that she could not create a website that would celebrate something that violated her religious beliefs. And as you know, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I believe the marriage is between one man and one woman. And I believe every American is entitled to live, to work, to worship according to the dictates of their conscience.
I understand you see this as religious freedom, but in other words, are you saying that you would not refuse services to people on the basis of their sexual orientation?
No, look, I think this is not about the law of public accommodation. And this is both of these cases came from Colorado, where the heavy hand of government came in and said, look, if you have a public accommodation, whether you're a cake baker or a web maker, that you're required to take all customers. That's what a public accommodation is, Margaret. But what the Supreme Court said here, and as they did in the Jack Smith case by a 7-2 majority, is that you can't compel the American people to create products that violate their conscience or their religious beliefs.
But to the public, for those who do hear some concern here, as president, how do you assure them that you will provide equal treatment to all?
Well, look, I believe in the freedom of religion and the freedom of conscience of every American. In this case, I think the Supreme Court drew a clear line and said yes to religious liberty.
I want to ask you about the ruling on affirmative action. Fundamentally, do you believe that there are racial inequities in the education system in the United States?
I'm so grateful that the Supreme Court of the United States here recognized what, frankly, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said back in 2003, was that affirmative action was a temporary solution. It was designed to make sure that we opened doors that hadn't been opened before. But she herself said that she expected it to go away within 25 years. It went away more quickly than that. I think that's a tribute to our nation. It's a great, great credit to the extraordinary accomplishments that minority students have had on our campuses, and I really do believe that we can move forward as a country and embrace the notion that we're all going to be judged not on the color of our skin, but on the content of our character, and in this case, on our GPA.
Am I understanding you saying there in that answer that you do not believe there is racial inequity in the education system in America?
I really don't believe there is. I believe there was. I mean, there may have been a time when affirmative action was necessary, simply to open the doors of all of our schools and universities. But I think that time has passed, and we'll continue to move forward as a colorblind society, which is really the aspiration, I believe, of every American.
The court also ruled that President Biden lacks the legal authority to forgive student debt for 40 million Americans, as he had tried to do. In response, the president made the political argument that Republican officials couldn't bear the thought of providing relief for working class, middle class Americans. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, it's just factually wrong. The majority of people that would have benefited from this student loan forgiveness are people with multiple graduate degrees. So you're going to say to working Americans, to truck drivers, to people working in the trades, we're going to take your taxes and pay down a part of the student debt of doctors and lawyers and PhDs. Nothing could be further than the truth. This was not about the middle class.
You still have to get young voters to turn out and vote for you, sir. This is a very politically popular issue for Democrats. So what is your pledge to young voters?
Well, my pledge to young voters is that we're going to get this economy moving again. They're worried about this economy, and unconstitutional government handouts are not what these young Americans are looking for. They're looking for a growing economy. And they know that by putting into practice the policies that we did in our administration by extending those Trump-Pence tax cuts, rolling back regulations, ending the war on energy, securing our border, we're going to set the table for a boundless American future for them.
There was some reporting in the Washington Post that President Trump, back in 2020, after the election, repeatedly asked you to call the governor of the state of Arizona, Doug Ducey, to get him to substantiate President Trump's claims, false claims of fraud. The Post is reporting you did call the Arizona governor multiple times to discuss the election. Is that reporting accurate? And what did you tell Governor Ducey at the time?
I did check in with not only Governor Ducey, but other governors in states that were going through the legal process of reviewing their election results. But there was no pressure involved. Margaret, I was calling to get an update. I passed along that information to the president, and it was no more, no less than that.
You are clearly saying you did not pressure the governor, but were you being pressured by Mr. Trump to get those, to influence Doug Ducey? And did you talk about this with the special counsel?
No, I don't remember any pressure. Look, the president and I, things came to a head at the end. Margaret, I've spoken about very openly, and the president and I continue to have a strong difference. I'll always believe that by God's grace, I did my duty under the Constitution that day in presiding over a joint session of Congress in the aftermath of the mayhem and the rioting. But in the days of November and December, this was an orderly process. You'll remember there were more than 60 lawsuits underway. States were engaging in appropriate reviews, and that these contacts were no more than that.
You did just make this trip to Ukraine. You were the only Republican presidential candidate to have done so, and you met with President Zelensky. He is being very clear that when NATO leaders meet this month, he expects clear steps and an invitation to join the Western military alliance. If you were president, would you make that pledge to a country that's currently at war with Russia?
I'm someone that believes that it's absolutely essential that the United States continue to provide military support to the Ukrainian military to push back on Russian aggression. Because if Russia were able to overrun Ukraine, I think it would not be long before Vladimir Putin ordered his troops across the border that under NATO we would be required to send men and women in uniform. It is not in our interest to send American forces into Ukraine, and I would never support it. And as I met with President Zelensky, he made it clear that he's not looking for that. And I have reason to believe, Margaret, that when NATO meets in a few weeks in Vilnius, that President Zelensky would be open to a conditional invitation to membership in NATO, namely saying that Ukraine will be a member of NATO once the war is over, once the war is won. I mean, I really do believe it's essential that America continue to lead, that our allies provide Ukraine with the support they need.
On the Afghanistan issue, the State Department just released a report Friday, an after-action report that did fault the Biden administration for a number of missteps, but it also faulted the Trump administration, saying the Trump administration had insufficient senior-level consideration of worst-case scenarios when it agreed to the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2020. President Trump signaled his desire to end the military presence before even reaching a deal with the Taliban. There was no plan or effort to help at-risk Afghans or plan for what to do with diplomats after withdrawal happened. Just a lack of planning. Do you accept that the Trump administration bears some responsibility for this chaos?
Margaret, I don't, because I know what the deal was that was negotiated with the Taliban. I mean, it was made very clear. I was in the room when President Trump told the leader of the Taliban, he said, look, you're going to have to cooperate with the Afghan government. You don't harbor terrorists, and you don't harm any American soldiers. We went 18 months without a single American casualty to the day at that Kabul airport that we lost 13 brave American service members. The blame for what happened here falls squarely on the current commander-in-chief. And under our administration, I promise you that while it was the intention of the president, the former president, to pull our troops out, when the Taliban broke the deal and moved into Mazar al-Sharif, and Joe Biden did nothing. That set into motion the catastrophe that became Afghanistan.
Are you saying there that you would have kept the troops beyond the 2020 deal? Is that what you're saying?
Well, look, candidly, it was always my belief that it would be prudent to keep a couple of thousand American forces there to support our efforts against terrorist elements, both in Afghanistan and in the region. And I think we ultimately would have done that. Just as the president announced the former president announced we were pulling troops out of Syria. You remember I was sent to Turkey to negotiate a ceasefire, and ultimately there's still American forces in Syria today. I think we would have landed in that place.
I want to ask you about China as well. Do you agree with President Biden that Xi Jinping is a dictator?
I think it's a statement of fact, Margaret. But look, I also want to say with regard to Ukraine, because a lot of people will say, well, China's the real issue. There's no more effective way to send a deafening message to communist China to check their military ambitions in the Asia Pacific than by giving Ukraine what they need to repel the Russian invasion. I know China's watching. They've forged this unlimited partnership with Russia. But I got to know, I've met President Xi. I've also met President Putin. I guarantee you President Xi is watching what's happening in Ukraine very carefully. We give the Ukrainians much more quickly than Joe Biden's doing now. We give them what they need to win this fight, to repel the Russian invasion. I think it'll lay a strong foundation for restraining the military aggression and ambitions of China in the Asia Pacific like almost nothing else. So
to be clear, you as president would commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan against a Chinese invasion? I
would say to you that I'm somebody that believes that it's no advantage to say what you would or wouldn't do. I thought one of the catastrophic errors that President Biden made before the Russian invasion in Ukraine was he signaled that if it was just a small invasion, that maybe we wouldn't send troops or we wouldn't respond. Look, Margaret, we never say what you'll never do. The United States of America should continue to be providing to Taiwan with the military means to defend themselves. What we want is a policy of deterrence.
Thank you for your time today, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Margaret.